Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, watch a Doctor Who story suggested by a friend of mine. They've chosen their favourite things about it, and as I'm commentating along, I have to guess what those favourite things are.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for tuning in, and a big thank you to Toby for inviting me on to Happy Times and Places to talk about one of my favourite stories from Doctor Who. My name is Frazer Gregory. I am a full-time Doctor Who fan and have been ever since the Daleks came up the stairs after Sylvester McCoy in remembrance of the Daleks. I'm now a part-time podcaster. If you'd like to hear more from me, you can find me on The Nine Be Praised, Gallifrey's Most Wanted, Doctor Who Literature with Jason Miller, the Trap One podcast, but mostly you will find me on A Hamster with a Blunt Penknife with my good friends Joe Ford and Simon Hart. I'm also on Twitter as @FelixFraser, Fraser spelled with a Z, or one word, if you'd like to see my ramblings about Doctor Who on there. Today I have come to discuss my favourite story from season 18 of Doctor Who, which is Meglos. Meglos, for some reason, isn't highly thought of by a lot of people. I don't fully understand why, because to me it is just a big, huge slice of fun. Obviously we know that John Nathan Turner made a concerted effort to move away from the humour of the Douglas Adams and Graham Williams era of season 17 when he took over, and I think that leads season 18 to be a little bit dry in places and a little bit poor-faced, and that just makes Meglos stand out as just a beacon of fun. It's just one last hurrah from that Graham Williams era. It's just very Douglas Adams-esque, right down to that Earthling who could just basically be Arthur Dent by the end. So there's just so much to love in it as well. It's packed full of great performances. It's a really quite funny script. The pacing is great. It just zips along. It's a zingy little story that you can just pop on and enjoy really quickly at any time. So, without further ado, let's dive into Meglos. Enjoy the treats within there, and we'll come back and discuss what my favourite things are about this story. Thanks be to Ty.
Well, hello, my darlings, and welcome to... Why have I started like that? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Hello, everybody. Lovies, darlings, wonderful people out there listening to Happy Times and Places. Here am I, Toby Hadoke, trying to inject a bit of joy into your lives or to your appreciation of Doctor Who, or if your lives are already full of joy and your appreciation of Doctor Who is also already at the apex of bonhomie and appreciation, then I've just come to either match you or top you up or whatever you want. Anyway, as you'll know by now, I hope, unless this is your very first one, this is a podcast in which I watch a Doctor Who story buoyed up by a friend, colleague, fellow fan, sometimes combination of all three, who has something nice to say about a story. And I have to guess what those things, one per episode and one bonus, are, whilst also commentating along and dropping in some truth bombs and some observations. By truth bombs, I mean obscure facts about actors generally, or childhood reminiscences that I do hope strike a chord, or at least give an indication of what it was like to be a fan at a certain point in time. For me, I started watching with a repeat of The Invisible Enemy and have not stopped since. Frazer, I don't really know. To be fair, I've come to know Frazer through the world of podcasts, and very much enjoy listening to him on Hamster with a Blunt Penknife with the lovely Joe Ford. And when we were talking, I don't know how it came about, but anyway, Frazer is the first person to give me a season 18 story. I had loads of people sign up to season 18 stories, some of them may be listening now. They probably aren't. But who have claimed those tales, but have not yet recorded their. In fact, they were all taken fairly early on, but nobody recorded their entries apart from Meglos, which wasn't taken. Frazer took it anyway, and he's the first. He was the last to claim a season 18 story, but the first person to send me in a contribution. Now I've since had a Leisure Hive, and I've since had a Keeper of Traken. Those people who did those stories have now given me their contributions, but I feel I should honour Frazer first, even though, as I'm sure will be discussed, this is not your typical season 18. So we might get to another season 18 sooner rather than later, because I try and mix up the styles of stories that I bung out for these things. So anyway, shall we see what I make of Meglos, and then we'll see what Frazer makes of Meglos, and the keen observers amongst you will note whether we're in accord or not. So I'm going to press play in... Oh, now this is interesting, because my robot lady speaker thing is no longer seeing eye to eye with my Fire Stick. So I've moved over to another device that I've stolen from my partner's other room, which is one that she uses when she's bathing and stuff like that. So it's a waterproof one. But I can't actually tell it what to do. So we've had to retire that poor old robot lady speaker. The future doesn't last very long. Do you know what I mean? In the old days, you had a television that you pressed the buttons on and it made the sound come out and it showed you the pictures. And occasionally you'd see black bars appear on the top or the bottom, and they'd get larger and larger as you knew your television was getting breakier and breakier. And occasionally there was talk of people's tellies blowing up. But this modern stuff, there seems to be something goes wrong every blooming day. Every time I try and relax and just go, this is sometimes known to be a plaintive cry out of this house of, I just want to watch the television. So I may actually have to turn the volume down manually. I'm going to have to do that. So, I mean, obviously there'll be an edit, but I'm going to go and have to turn the sound down on this. Oh, the humanity. Turn the sound down manually on the speakers, like an old timer. God, what else am I going to have to do next? Now I'm going to have to go walk to London and write a letter to my beloved. Anyway, so I'm just going to do that. Cool. So there we are, and I've just had to, boil water in a pot and use a mangle to dry my clothes, and also manually sort out the volume of what I'm about to watch and listen to, which is Meglos, which is a story I will have watched actually on a black and white portable television, which is the thing we had in the olden days, because the first Doctor Who episode I saw in colour at home was episode 2 of The Two Doctors. So don't let these poncy velvet tones deceive you into thinking I'm somehow from posh stock. We didn't get a video machine until episode 1 of Time and the Rani, and I didn't watch Doctor Who in colour until episode 2 of The Two Doctors. My mum had other priorities, and they weren't in getting surround sound and 4K HD colour. That didn't exist then, but you know what I mean. So yeah, I would have watched this in black and white, but it's funny because I don't remember the stories being in black and white. And in fact, there's one episode of this I'm pretty sure I watched at somebody else's house, but I can't quite remember now. Anyway, let's get into it. It's funny the little quirks that we have, though, where it's not just about, oh, I watched this Doctor Who story. It's where I was or what we had in our lives at that time. That's why it's such a powerful tool, because it's a sort of anchor within, if not key moments, like I've just done one recently. I did Remembrance of the Daleks. There's a key moment there. My grandfather died. But it anchors us in little, oh, we had that telly then, or that was the pet that we had, or that was the room of the house that the telly was in, because we actually changed the room. By the time all my brothers and sisters had left home, the house was so cold, my mum and me watched telly in the kitchen because there was an Aga, and that's what kept that room warm. So why would you warm the rest of the house when you've already got a room that is constantly warm because an Aga is constantly on? So we did actually move. Anyway, I'm sure none of that is of interest to anybody, but I think, you do sometimes get flashes of, I watched that story in that room. I remember the room I was in when I watched my first ever episode of Doctor Who, and I remember the room I was in when I watched the Two Doctors, because that was when we got that new colour telly, and anyway, interesting. Right. So anyway, I would guess what room we were in when we watched Meglos, but I do have a feeling I watched at least one at a school friend's house. But it doesn't matter. It's Doctor Who. It's Doctor Who and the Meglos. And we're going to press play in 3, 2, 1. Oh, look at that. I could just do that with my fingers without having to shout at anybody. So this was still a relatively new... I still think of this Starfield title sequence with Tom Baker's face in particular. Well, I see it as new, but also as unusual with Tom Baker's face, because obviously we got used to it much later with Davison and Colin Baker. But the Starfield and Tom Baker is quite an unusual one because it's so short-lived, I guess. But it felt like a modern spangly interloper into the far better, because it was the one I grew up with, Bernard Lodge, TARDIS Time Tunnel one. That is still my favourite, I think. Tom Baker is looking quite gaunt and thin, isn't he? But I like that he has, he's got half of his costume off and he's got an apron and he's getting up to stuff in the TARDIS. TARDIS scenes in Doctor Who at this time were very much, part of its make. You expected a TARDIS scene, really. I've got a feeling I missed the beginning of Meglos because I remember not quite knowing where the Earthling had turned up from, and then when I got the book, because this was one of the few Target books I got of stories that I'd seen, and I think I maybe got it because it was the only one in the school bookshop or something, but I'd got it as a sort of, because I wanted to get a Doctor Who book and there weren't many options, because it wouldn't have been a go-to because I had seen it, and if I had seen it, I was less interested, even though I'd only seen it once. I was less interested than in, stories of yore that were marvellous and from the golden olden age, even though I enjoyed Meglos as a kid. And I have to say, I have some sympathy with Frazer, in that I too found season 18 quite dour, and I certainly didn't see this as a different kind of story from the others. Certainly of a lower quality story. I remember thinking it was quite exciting, and I didn't read that the General Gregory and co were sort of humorous characters, but then when I was older and I started collecting on video, it was definitely, Meglos was definitely, this is the kind of duffer of season 18. And I think it probably is, and for some of the reasons that are oft talked about. But I still think it's great fun. And I have to, now I like this. These special eye medicine. That's just a nice little attention to detail, the sort of medical attention given to that extra. And this is lovely lighting here in this part of Tigella, which where we're seeing what's going on, on this planet that is rather now sort of humorously rendered, i.e., if you've got hair like that, you're a scientist. If you've got the hats on, you're religious, and there's no nuance in anyone's beliefs. One set believe in one thing, one set believe in the other, and they argue about it, but only using two speaking actors. It's and quite how Zasta fits in is anybody's guess. Well, I don't believe in God, but I haven't got that sort of hair, so I'm leader. Although he does say he's a believer later, doesn't he? Wonderful to see Jacqueline Hill, and I remember her, but I hadn't realised, of course, because I was, however old I was, 6 or 7 when this was on, I hadn't realised that was Barbara. In fact, did I even know? I didn't know who. No, I'd have known of Barbara because I'd got the books, but I'd never seen a Hartnell story at this point. And it has to be said, I was talking to somebody about this today. Shakespeare does this where, countries or peoples or sects or whatever, or political factions will be represented by one person who kind of, who is a spokesperson, mouthpiece / representation of the whole lot. And it's a necessary compromise of television and drama. Oh, she just said compromise too, where all of the Dions will be represented by Jacqueline Hill, and all of the savants by Crawford Logan as Diedrichs. Although Caris, they get 2 speaking actors, whereas the Dions only get 1, so you can tell whose side the writers are on. I think Jacqueline Hill is very good, but this is sort of children's drama planet representation, isn't it? Where you've got these 2 factions, very broadly drawn, and it is sort of slightly reminiscent of the worst of Star Trek as well, where it's sort of rather ponderous people arguing very sincerely with each other about stuff that's just made up. And that's a lovely line about the Doctor seeing the universe, seeing the strands that join the universe together and mending them while they break. Poor old Edward Underdown, who was, this has been covered in a lot of what is talked about with Meglos, was a handsome and dignified actor in his day, and is a bit poorly now when making this, and so as a result is a bit sort of stiff and wooden, and he doesn't do anything wrong, but he's kind of underpowered, really. It's and it's the kind of part that it's not a great. The part doesn't really help either. But yeah, no. As a kid, I actually think I probably found this more fun than the sort of maths in a lay-by, or even something like Keeper of Traken, which I think is hugely admirable now, but seemed sort of slightly slow and poetic, whereas I wanted sort of action adventure and obvious bad guys, and this has obvious bad guys. It's got the spiny cactus guy and it's got the space pirate chaps. It's funny. I wonder how people, because I know people don't like David Tennant and Billy Piper when they're very sort of confident and holding hands, but the Doctor and Romana, they are quite smug, aren't they? Well, I think Romana is a little bit, but I don't mind it at all. I think it's quite fun, and I think Lalla Ward is quite, has a sort of perky energy about her, and I mean this is attempting an interesting conversation about the difference between science and religion, and with all the schisms that are currently ripping apart our discourse. There is very little nuance in these 2 arguments that are being presented. And you think, you wouldn't have such unnuanced arguments in real life, and you go, well, actually we do these days. And I love the way that Jacqueline Hill does her then where, when she's and it's a real unfortunate thing for the scientists, where they're going, this is not a heavenly thing, it's scientific, it's man-made, but they have no explanation as to where it came from. And that's the interesting thing about faith, actually. I'm not a religious person, but I'm not as dismissive of religion as some of my tribe, because I actually think religion takes a slight effort of the will, which I always think is laudable, but it also takes an element of humility that I have to say some of my atheist brethren do not have. There's nothing more tiresome, I think, than a militant atheist. It strikes me as common sense that it's unlikely that there's a deity out there, especially as different cultures have come up with their own versions of the same thing, and it just happens that what ours would be right because of where we were born. That it strikes me as just fairly unlikely. But anything where you sort of humble yourself and are less important to a code of ethics that has been dictated by a divine being, means that we all know, yes, how badly religion has manifested itself in various societies, and it's been used as a tool for everything, segregation and the protection of the powerful, etc. But also, it also has prompted very selfless acts, great charitable acts, great cohesions in societies, and so I understand where religion comes from, and I understand that it can definitely be a force for good, and I think and also yes, science is very important, and scientific rigor is very important, but also science can be very badly used and applied and mishandled. So it's opening up a very interesting argument, albeit in very, very basic terms, but that's because it's Doctor Who. Now, here we have General Grugger and co, and their slightly fringy CSO hair and beards. Stick-on beards are a thing. I was going to say you don't get much anymore, but I watched the first episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds last night, and that's got a stick-on beard. So actually, stick-on beards still get plenty of work. This scene sync technology is rather marvellous. I like these screens, and I like the fact they have a little play with it on this establishing stuff of the gas tax, where they walk round one and behind one and scratch the surface one. They're not just going, we're using this scene sync to get these, these small models of these screens to tower over actors who are in real life much taller than they are, but we're going to get them to interact in a way that's going to show this technology is really, really working. Now, obviously, that CSO fringing is not really up to scratch today, but I think it's pretty reasonable, and I like the fact you see the shadows on the planet's surface, and as I say, that they walk round. Those screens, and that you can have a sort of wide shot and a moving shot because of all the synchronization. That's some quite bad CSO bleeding there, but I'm into that. I think that's good fun, and it means that it gives this story its own unique sort of USP. Yes, a USP is a unique selling point, but it's its own particular visual style that is something that can, when you go think about Meglos, you go, oh well, it's it's the one we've seen thing, as well as the one with spiny face doctor and blah blah blah. They are comedic villains. There's nothing wrong with a comedic villain. There's a danger when you have a comedic villain, because if the villains are too stupid, they're not a threat, but they're pretty amoral, and that they'll. And I quite like the fact that they're not. I love that musical sting as well. And Bill Fraser's wonderful piratical eyes. I mean, they're giving a performance all on their own. By the way, I don't know. I haven't read the info text on the Blu-ray. I think the DVD gets it wrong. There are certainly all the paper accounts of Meglos I've seen say that Christopher Owen, the Earthling, does the voice of Meglos. He doesn't. It's this guy, Crawford Logan. Crawford Logan is a very experienced, Scottish as it happens, radio actor. He played Paul Temple on the radio, and he is Diedrichs, and he is in none of the scenes with the plant and the pirates and the Earthling, whereas Christopher Owen as the Earthling is in the scenes with them. So it's not very practical that he would be doing the voice of Meglos. So I see why people would think he would, because there's some dialogue that he has that is treated where it's the Meglos speaking through the Earthling, for sure. But when the plant is talking, when it's the plant, that is not Christopher Owen, it is Crawford Logan. And we covered that in my Who's Round episode, but I don't know if anybody that actually writes up the things has ever bothered to listen to those. I've read whole books on subjects that could have done with listening to some of the people that I've interviewed on Who's Round who don't list them in their sources, and you think, how much research have you bothered to do if you haven't? I'm not saying that the Blu-ray range should, by the way, but other more specialist books on, say, a particular contributor, and you go, well, I interviewed about 9 people that worked with that person. You haven't listened to my interviews with those people where I asked them about that person. That's seems anyway. The dodecahedron. Now that's going to be something. I remember the dodecahedron from watching it, and I remember the gas tax, and I remember the plant. So as I say, I think I came into this episode a bit late because I don't think I'd seen the beginning. And when I got the book, of course, the opening of the book is the Earthling being kidnapped, which we don't see in the story. And I remember being quite surprised by that it starts with the Earthling already captured. And for a story that underruns, it seems to me that we're missing a trick there. Of course, for those scenes, you'd have probably needed a location. And that was something that this production doesn't have. I love the fact that Brotadak steals the thing. I like the rather mistrusting dynamic between the Gaztax and Meglos, but also the fact that he's one step ahead of them with all of that, so that it doesn't undermine him. And in fact, yes, having the stupid, I suppose they're the secondary villains, even though they're more prominent characters than Meglos, but it means that because he's one step ahead of them, makes him slightly more potent a threat, because he's got these sort of underlings who are duplicitous and slightly comedic, who he kind of runs rings round. And therefore it enables Romana to run rings around the Gaztax without us losing all sense of danger from the story, because actually they're not the main threat. But Bill Frazer seemed to be everywhere at this point. I certainly knew who he was, and of course he's in Canine and Company as well. It was like, oh, well, somebody obviously likes him. But I didn't remember Brotadak from watching it as a kid. And then when I got the book, my favourite thing about the book was Brotadak, because he was so funny. And then I discovered later, when reading the Doctor episode guide, I went, well, let's see who played Brotadak. And I'd known Frederick Treves as an actor. He's in a thing called Brat Farrar with Mark Greenstreet, and he got credited above Mark Greenstreet, even though so it was suggested that he was actually quite a senior actor, and he popped up in all sorts, usually wearing tweed, usually as a general or a ministry man or whatever. And so when I saw that he played Brotadak, I was like, what? That is completely the last person I would have expected. And I have to say, if you've grown up watching Frederick Treves in the stuff that Frederick Treves was usually in, I watched this knowing it was when I then collected it later, and having been quite surprised that it was Frederick Treves, still was like, is that really Frederick Treves? Because he's quite unrecognisable. He's grown a few whiskers, and he seems slightly thinner faced, partially due to maybe it's because he's not wearing a 3-breasted suit or whatever. I don't know, but he really is unrecognisable as Frederick Treves, and is having a whale of a time, is definitely cast against type, and I think is absolutely delightful. And the spelling is changed in the book because, and I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know, I'm sure, but Brotadak is an anagram of bad actor, because John Flanagan and Andrew McCulloch, the writers, thought that this was the sort of part that would usually be given to a bad actor. And when Freddie Treves found out, he was so delighted, he phoned his wife. And I even talk about that in one of my stand-up shows, where Meglos features quite heavily as a sort of story I think's a bit naff. It's in it for that. I just needed a sort of go-to thing that people would recognise. I've never had any particular ire towards Meglos, although when I got grown up and realised how important and scientific and lovely and elegiac and poetic and smart season 18 was, I would be a bit sniffy about Meglos, because it does have its issues of, all the virtues the other stories have, which also have their problems, but all the virtues the other stories have that make them uniquely season 18, this story does not have. But I take Frazer's point that in and of itself it's great fun. And I watched it the other day because I hadn't watched it for a while in preparation for this, and enjoyed certain aspects of it. I enjoyed certain aspects of it I'm not sure are particularly good, but that's perfectly fine because it's not being broadcast, at 5:30 on a Saturday tea time now, expecting modern audience to accept it. It's being watched as an historical artifact and something. Look at the way that Frazer's eyes act. And one of them goes quite sort of wide-eyed and bulbous, and the other one sort of squints, and they both roll, but almost in different directions. And they're wearing. And I love this theme, by the way, for the changeover, for the swap of Meglos and the Earthman. And the Earthman as a bespectacled city gent, I think, is a perfect image. That is a perfect Doctor Who image for me. Christopher Owen looks absolutely right, although there's now shades of Jacob Rees-Mogg, but Jacob Rees-Mogg is a charlatan who wears the clothes, who wears the costume of a dignified, polite Englishman, but would asset strip this country and sell its bones for a fiver. Anyway, that's not the point. See, I think this is Christopher Owen speaking now, but he wasn't doing the voice when it was the plant, but it's the same treatment. But I think the choice of having... I love, part of Doctor Who's joy is that it's this sort of quaint British tradition in a way. I like the way that Christopher Owen does this alien sort of hand touching as well. And I love that very simple device of going, what does our monster look like? It looks like a person, but with a cactus skin and face. I love that. That's a great Doctor Who-y thing to do. You've got a city gent in a suit with a green spiny cactus face and hands, and I love that slightly alien way that Christopher Owen sort of touches his face there, and the bit where he transforms a little bit later where he's slightly out of shot, I think is terrific. But I like that theme as well, and when the plant and him go backwards, and that piece of music, because of course we have one musician for this episode and then a different musician for the next three, so that's quite interesting. But I like that. That was quite dramatic and quite exciting, and I like the fact that the gas tax initial thought is to go, well, we'll just nick this stuff and then we'll bugger off. And Meglos is like, I knew you were going to do that, so I'm locking you in, kind of thing. All of that is beautiful. I think that's quite nicely done. It speaks to the character of all of those villains who are enjoyable to be around. Tom does look so gaunt though, doesn't he, Tom Baker? The other thing was, for years, or for a short time, I pronounced it Meglos, because we watched it at the time, and I talked about it to my friends at school, and we called it Meglos. And even when I got the book and it was Meglos, I was like, well, do they just not pronounce the in the middle then? Because it's not Meglos. Meglos sounded wrong to me. It's easier to say when you say Meglos. And there are various... I can't think of any now, but there are various words where you'd throw in an extra syllable to make it easier to say as a kid. I'm sure I haven't made that up. But anyway, there's still a part of me that thinks that it's called Meglos. Even though I was there at the time, it's not like Crinoid and Crinoid, where I got it wrong from reading the book, and then when I watched it was corrected. I watched this go out, and I was convinced it was Megalos. The Chronicist Teresis loop... I mean, there's some real liberties taken with the timings in these stories. In this story, I mean, the main characters haven't left the TARDIS yet. I do like Romana's costume, by the way. But this, a time loop is a kind of thing as a kid that you could definitely get your head around as being a threat, and it's a Doctor Who-y thing because it's time, and they're in a TARDIS, and this is, and you don't want the science fiction to be too hard or complicated. I mean, we'll talk next week about the way that they get out of this through the medium of amateur dramatics. Tom Baker has a wonderful mournful countenance when he wants to, doesn't he? I love this shooting from. I don't think Terence Dudley is the world's greatest director, but I do think it's quite a fun part of Doctor Who that Terence Dudley, who writes various weird stories a bit later on, has also directed the show, but he never does both sort of at the same time, or within the same season, because he was I get the impression he wasn't everybody's cup of tea, shall we say, but he directs this. This is the only Doctor Who story that he directs. But I like that shot over the Earthman's shoulder where he's doing something that we can't quite make out. It's a bit like, I mean, it's not in the same league, but it's a bit like the bit I love in Waters of Mars, where you're focusing on the foreground and in the background somebody slightly out of focus starts shaking a bit weird, which means that they've been taken over by the water beasts of doom. And I love that because it's unnerving and it's strange and it's just in the corner of your eye. And I do kind of like that with the Earthman there, that they haven't quite focused on what he's doing, and he's doing something strange, and I still don't quite know exactly what he's doing, but it's just a bit weird and just a bit off kilter, and it means it's a little bit unsettling, and it is a very economical way of showing that something is happening, so that then when he turns around and it's the Doctor, you sort of, you retrofit that and go, oh, well, that's whatever he was doing was, changing shape to us, to get us into that cliffhanger and be the plant Earthman hybrid is now looking like Doctor Who, and suddenly you go, oh, we're in a completely different story. It's going to be one of those stories where the actor playing the Doctor also gets to play the bad guy, which will have interesting consequences. But I have to choose something for episode 1 of Meglos. And I think I'll probably have to get in there early with, partially because I love the bit where Lex is having that conversation with Zaster, and he says something like, will you trust me to sort it out? And she, who's obviously been etched as the intransient religious fetishist intractable villain type, gives him a sort of warm smile, and and is giving an attempt to say that although she's the she's the crazy religious figure, she's not going to play it entirely on that note. And I sort of do buy that she and Zastor have a kind of friendship, which is nice, and which is because because the story doesn't really want you to side with the Dions. But you've got a classy actress there giving it a little bit of extra depth, and I particularly like the way that she goes, then where, when Diedrichs has done his, it's an artifact, it's scientific, and you go, yeah, of course it is, these silly religious people, and she just very reasonably, having had to do her religious, it is descended from the heavens, and again, that's a perfectly reasonable acting choice. It's not a kind of thing you'd probably do now, but in terms of the métier within which she is working, that kind of religious fervor thing, which again underlines what she's representing in the in the face of the other thing that is being represented within the very broadly drawn dynamic in the planet of Tygella, and then she brings it right down for then where, and very reasonably. And also the fact that, then later on I discovered that character whom I'd remembered, particularly for a moment that I will talk about in a later episode, is Jacqueline Hill from the dawn of Doctor Who. And I love that, because, this didn't happen massively with shows at that time, and it seemed like sort of something really magic when it did, because if somebody had left a thing, they didn't go back to it. Or certainly that was how it seemed to me. And so many series when I was young, loads of regulars would leave at the end of one season, a whole new load of regulars would come in the next season. You didn't expect to see any of the old ones come back because actors moved on to other things. And the idea that actors would come back to a thing. Now I'm aware that things are much, much different, but it still felt in those days that an actor would have to be really doing Doctor Who a favour to sort of want to come back to it, because people moved on, whereas of course most actors are desperate for work all the time. But although there was more work about those days. But then I read in a book, I think it was in Doctor Who Celebration, that said that Jacqueline Hill came back to play Lexa in Meglos. And so suddenly I was like, oh my God. And I saw her in that when I was a kid. How lucky was I as a kid? I saw Barbara come back to Doctor Who. So not only because she's really, really good, and because we love Jacqueline Hill in this house, we love Ian and Barbara in this house. I love everything that Ian and Barbara stand for, and I love the two actors that play them. And the fact that the first Doctor Who, companion actor to come back and play a different part, and it's a sort of unique circumstance really as well, either because a former regular comes back as a guest star in a different role, which is unusual, which is totally unusual, and in fact was vetoed with a story I've just recently done, Caves of Androzani, with Michael Craze playing Krelper, which was vetoed by John Nathan Turner, and yet he's allowed this to happen, and it's wonderful that it happened, and she's so good, but it's also what it represents. It represents that Barbara has come back to Doctor Who, and not for any anniversary thing, not for any special reason, not even in some bells and whistles story, but in a strange, uncelebrated, occasionally very silly slice of Doctor Who, where there's far bigger headlines to be had around it. The story before, transforming the look of the show, and the end of the season, seeing out the longest serving leading man in a funny little interlude with some comedy pirates and a strange jungle planet. There's a supporting role being played by a Doctor Who icon, because of course in those days we didn't really think of some of those characters as icons. Yeah, they were the old companions or whatever, but I think we can now say that Ian and Barbara are Doctor Who icons, and that there's a Doctor Who icon nestled within the humble environs of Meglos. So it's Jacqueline Hill returning to Doctor Who, but also being Lexa and the stuff that Lexa does, because she gets some lovely, lovely moments, within some, fairly uninspiringly staged scenes where, the whole dynamic of a planet is, 8 extras in a room, one in one set of costumes, one in another set of costumes, and at their head a speaking actor representing all of them, and in the middle of those two speaking actors another actor who's in a rather tired way trying to mediate between the two of them. Dear. So it's Jacqueline Hill all the way. So I haven't said. Isn't it interesting? I've skirted around saying her name, but I haven't said. And I thought that's very good. I've got away with, and because I've had complaints, but because she's broken, I haven't said Alexa for this whole thing. I've just said Lexa about 9 times, which will probably have the same effect. So if I was to score Lexa 10 out of 10, that's probably just played havoc with your equipment. What does Frazer, who, by the way, for those of you that are listening, because this comes out as a podcast, first, will it ever be a YouTube video? I don't know, if I'm honest, at this stage. And that's a shame, because Frazer has dressed as Tom Baker. So I'm about to hear from Frazer Gregory in the form of a video in which he has the hat and the scarf and has gone to great effort to make his presentation visually interesting. And so here am I giving it to you in the audio medium. Over to Frazer. I hope he chooses Barbara Wright as Lexa. What's he going to choose as his favourite thing for part 1 of Meglos?
So it was actually really difficult to narrow down to just 5 things what I really love about Meglos. But for episode 1, what I have picked is the way that episode 1 opens. That opening TARDIS scene with the Doctor and Romana. And I'm not referring to the chronic hysteresis and the waggling of Canine's tail, though that is fantastic. It is the fact that the story picks up where the Leisure Hive left off. So you have Romana in the same outfit, you have the Doctor fixing Canine after he's been into Brighton Beach, and it's that continuation of one story into the next that we haven't seen really since season 12, and before that we didn't really see after the Patrick Troughton era, and it's something that follows on in the rest of season 18. So Meglos leads into Full Circle, where there's the reference to the Earthling being dropped off at home to his wife. That then gives you the E-Space trilogy, which then goes into the Keep of Traken and Logopolis and Castrovalva trilogy. So the fact that season 12 flows like one continuous story, all coming from episode 1 of Meglos, is my first favourite thing about this.
Well, that's nice and not what I chose, but I agree. It's funny, isn't it? Because I remember being very surprised when not long after this, I saw the first William Hartnell story that I saw, which was An Unearthly Child, and was surprised to see it end by leading into the next story, and then discovered down the years that for the first few years of Doctor Who, it was an adventure in space and time and space, because one story led to the other most of the time. And then when you think that stops happening, when the individual episode titles go, you go, it becomes much more self-contained. Then, of course, it doesn't at all, because 10th Planet leads into Power, Moonbase leads into Bacratera, Faceless Ones leads into Evil of the Daleks, Web of Enemy of the World leads into Web of Fear, Dominators into the Mind Robber. So suddenly you're going, this thing that I think only happened in the Hartnell era and doesn't happen again happens loads, and it happens after this, doesn't it? Of course, Forty Doomsday into Kinder, Frontios into Resurrection, so it's something I think doesn't happen. And then when you watch a story or watch stories already, you go, oh, no, it actually happens quite a lot more than I think. But I remember when I encountered it, because even when I was younger, I didn't really think that one Doctor Who story led to another. I thought they were a series of adventures. And so when they did link together, I loved it, because it felt like it was sort of knitted together as part of a greater whole that made me feel a bit more a part of it. I don't know, because there was sort of continuity. It meant me, as a loyal viewer who watched all the time, felt like I was on a continuing flow, which made me feel invested slightly more in it, or rewarded slightly more by it, because I got more out of it than the person who hadn't been watching last week or whatever. So I like what Frazer has alluded to there, that when it seems that one story is picking up from where another left off, you as a regular viewer enjoy that, and you're feeling you're part of a greater whole. Although, interestingly, instinctively, I remember when I got to know an older fan, and I didn't get to know many when I was younger. I remember him saying, who'd watched a lot of the old stories back in the day, he said he thought it was better when they didn't do that, because it was so unlikely that you'd go in real life from one adventure directly into another, and he preferred the idea that what we see of Doctor Who's life is just the exciting bits, and there's plenty of times where they're just putting their feet up, and that is more believable. And of course it's more believable. It's a ridiculous idea that every time you land the TARDIS, you're going to land in some dangerous situation. But then again, Doctor Who is quite a ridiculous idea. But of course, that's not an excuse to make it unbelievable. You don't go, well, nobody travels through space and time in a police box, so therefore we can do anything. Because you go, well, no, within that ridiculous premise, I still have to make it as believable as possible for the drama to work, and for anything that helps the viewer get on board and go, okay, I've got to put that ridiculousness aside and still believe in this. So it's on the one hand, I sort of like it both ways in a way, because on the one hand, I do think it's a bit unbelievable if every story leads on to the next story. But on the other hand, I do really like it when one story relates to another or leads into another, particularly in the classic era for some reason. I don't know why that is. I like it. I think because current Doctor Who has story arcs across the whole season, I think I strive a little bit more for individual episodes to be a little bit more individualistic, because you want to watch a standalone, and you don't want to have to have the idea of, oh well, this only makes sense if you've watched episode 1 and episode 13. That gets a little bit, that then I've got my eye on the general viewer, and I'm worried about them being alienated. But also sometimes I just want to watch a slice of Doctor Who that stands alone. Whereas of course pretty much all Doctor Who adventures from classic Who stand alone, although some of them have references, and as we know, there's that argument that John Nathan Turner made the whole thing too referential to the show's past or whatever. So I sort of have my cake and eat it with it. I totally buy what Frazer has said, and I do like that, and it makes me, as a feeling, as something that I can't really quantify, sort of comforted when, oh yeah, that's referred to that thing that I know about. But equally, I'm also very happy when it's just a series of, oh no, you've dropped in on, over a 2-year period, well, not that, but it's been a couple of weeks since the last adventure. They've been to a couple of planets, and now, but this is the dangerous one. So yeah, I like that because it does also show, interestingly, when I was talking about the nuances of the arguments between science and religion, and I have sympathy with both sets of arguments and both sets of arguers. It's possible to not be religious, but to see the importance of religion and almost, in a way, admire people who follow a moral code, and also be horrified by people that follow the same set of instructions and do it to do horrendous things, of course. And of course, I equally admire people that my personal sympathies lie more with going, well, no, I'm responsible for everything that I do, and any moral code I have to account for without saying, well, this is written down over here that it's okay or not okay if I do this. I've got nobody to blame but myself. But I also get quite tired of sort of smug atheism, if you like. So there's nuance everywhere. That machine that isn't a lecturer has just made a noise at me, which really worries me. God, that's the other thing about modern technology. It makes noises and it does things. The speaker that is nearly got Jacqueline Hill's name in Meglos, one of the reasons we've had problems, she's not been pairing with the Fire Stick, and I think it's just that our speaker, who cannot be named, is quite an old one, and we updated our Fire Stick and it's just not playing sound. And I've tried everything, and sometimes it does, and if I restart everything, sometimes it doesn't. But this is getting really irritating. So anyway, we've paired it with this. But yes, a couple of days ago, because we've got these lights as well that we haven't programmed the switches, but they're for disabled people because my partner can't really flick switches, but she can touch pad, and we've got these things that need to be properly programmed. We ran out of money. But they can dim or turn off or go up or whatever. And anyway, she was in the bedroom the other day and the lights just went on of their own accord. She called me up and said, have you just pressed anything? I was downstairs. I was like, no. She said, the lights have just come on. I wasn't touching anything. And then the following morning, we woke up to the speaker with Jacqueline Hill's name from Meglos nearly, talking downstairs. Now, I don't quite know what she said, but she said something and we weren't there. And we weren't talking to her. So, but now this new speaker thing, which makes a noise a bit like a sort of a bongo drum, has just done its bongo drum nose. I think because I wasn't playing anything through them, so they've gone, we're bored now, we're turning off. I didn't ask you to, and if you've made that decision for yourself, what other decisions will you start to make, speaker? Will you soon decide that you don't actually need humanity anymore? Whoa. Anyway, that's not the theme of Meglos, so we can't really go any further with those thoughts. It's a funny old thing, Meglos. I don't, hand on heart, I don't think it's particularly good, but will I be entertained watching it? Yes. Is it a story I will pick to watch for fun in the future? Yes. Are there better stories I will watch less frequently than Meglos? For sure, because there are some stories that I think are very well made and are very smart and intelligent and good quality that don't while away a Sunday afternoon in quite the same way that Meglos might. Does it get some things wrong? Oh boy, does it. Yeah. Are some bits of it actively bad? Yeah, probably. But yet I forgive it for all of that, because I think some of its bad things, like the depiction of the society on Tigella, which is very simplistic, does have a kind of naive charm about it, and you've got to kind of admire the ambition of going, well, I've got to present these big ideas, and I've got 3 speaking actors with which to do it, so this is how I'm going to do it. And then the costume people go, we've got a load of wigs. Well, that'd be the makeup people, wouldn't it? They go, if we give all of one of them these wigs, that'll help sell it, won't it? So then the actors turn up and go, I've thought about my character, and I think it would be excellent if Diedrich said, what's that? That's my hair. What everybody who has who believes in science grows his... Where does that come from then? Is it that you start tinkering with a calculator and suddenly your hair grows blonde as a result? Or is it that you show an aptitude for... you recalibrate an engine, and so they shave your head off and plonk a wig for mathematical excellence on your head. How does that work? I've no idea. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's an enjoyable, slightly childish, slightly silly, at times misjudged, but at times very nicely judged, interesting effort. And yes, somewhat, but it's very much its own thing. I suppose you could say it is unique in season 18 in terms of its tone and its ambition. And anything that... I'm always a bit fond of anything that goes against the grain, even though the grain of season 18 is one I rather like. But as I say, at the time, I wouldn't have said that Meglos was any different to some of the other stories, and actually it was much, much easier to follow and much more in the image of what I, as a whatever I was, 6 or 7 year old, thought of Doctor Who as, which was bad guys threatening the Doctor, scary lethal plants in tendrily jungles, and space battles and laser guns and all of that, rather than elegant music and crushed velvet and lots of thoughtful chat about maths and stuff. So thanks, Frey. But as I say, I love that stuff now. So we always come to revisit stuff as well, and rethink and reframe the way that we see the world. And by the world, I mean certain Doctor Who stories. Well, it is. I suppose it is a bit like a religion to me, Doctor Who. It is descended from the heavens, or BBC Television Centre. Trying not to disappoint the Tygellans with me, Toby Hadoke, has been Frazer Gregory, who can be found on Twitter at Felix Fraser. Could be Latin at Felix Fraser, but the spelling is the same. I'm grateful to him and to the many patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Stephen Moffat, Peter Burns, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, Tim Arding, David, Nigel Bromley, Jenny at Bluebox 99, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Rob Dawson, Grant Davidson, John Deere, Chris Dunford-Kelk, Paul Dunn, Jason Gorman, Siobhan Galichon, Chris Hyam, Ian Key, Joe Llewellyn, Gavin McLean, Philip Marsh, Nathan Martin, Kevin Murdoch, Graham Knott, Adam Parker, Barry Platt, Risto Mattisarillo, Frank Shales, and David Trainier. The music is by Dave Gates, and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like to join that list of people, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. For as little as £3 a month, you get advance releases, you get bonus material, and you get monthly AMAs, and you're ahead 6 months or so with these Happy Times and Places podcasts, and a month for the Too Much Information and Indefinable Magic podcasts. And there's also a unique to patron podcast called Far Too Much Information, as well as all sorts of other goodies and previews of things and interviews and etc., etc. Anyway, that's £3 a month, patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. The tiers go higher, and there are other increments along the way, but all of the material, all of the broadcast material, is all available at the lowest tier, and that tier also qualifies for a 10% discount, as do all the other ones, if you sign up and commit to a year in one go. Now, you may want to avoid having to be committed to anything, but still reward a creative toiling away at the coalface of cyberspace, in which case you can go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke and essentially buy me a coffee which doesn't, unfortunately, give you any of the bonus things, but it does mean you can occasionally show your appreciation if I sound especially hungry or I've done something that you particularly like. However, I know that times are tough, the world is going crazy, and money is really, really tight. Everything's gone up in price. Well, these have not. These are free at the point of contact, and all you have to do that costs you nothing, but helps if that's what you fancy doing, is to go to iTunes, to Podbean, to Spotify, anywhere on the internet where you can rate these things and give them 5 stars and a few lines of positive review. That really does help. It helps separate this from the very crowded sphere of Doctor Who podcasting, which is full of great stuff, and there are brilliant people doing valiantly out there. But, you know, I'm only plugging mine right now, and it really helps if you give a 5-star review and say nice things, and also tweet and Facebook and do all of that stuff as well, because it just gets word out there. And, you know, I work hard on these, and it would be nice if somebody like-minded who you think might not know about them might enjoy them if you point them in this direction. So thanks, much appreciated if you could do that. And I'm sorry I have to come a begging, but that's the way of these things these days. And of course that means I'm something of a social media whore, which means you can follow me on Twitter at Toby Hadoke. You can follow these podcasts at Hadoke Podcasts, so that filters out all the other extraneous non-Doctor Who flavoured stuff that I might do, which includes plugging my comedy club at Excess Malarkey. I mean, at Excess Malarkey is what it's called on Twitter. It's just called Excess Malarkey in real life. Those ats are just for cyberspace. But Excess Malarkey is every Tuesday in Manchester. It's run for 26 years on a not-for-profit basis, bringing fantastic comics for as little an entry fee as we can possibly conjure. And yeah, that's every Tuesday, and that has its Twitter feed at Excess Malarkey if you'd like to find out about that. But I know a lot of Doctor Who fans couldn't give a monkey's about how funny I try to be. It's just the facts, mister. It's just the facts. Now, having plugged Patreon there, actually, as I'm recording this, the patrons could, have some justification in tapping their fingers and looking at their watch and going, hang on, it's Friday, and we haven't had a release yet, because patrons get something on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Oh, and that's not including the Tuesdays, where you get pictures of my dog, but I don't really count that as a release. That would be a bit stiff of me. But as I record this, on Friday, the 10th of March, fact fans, at 10 to 8 in the evening, when normally 1 minute past midnight something plops into their inbox. In fact, I don't know how it happens. I don't know how you get it, because I don't get any of that. But I throw it out there. People seem to listen. However, they've had nothing today, but that's because at midnight I was just wrangling, getting my other half, who was unwell, and then to try and sort out getting stuff to her in hospital. I had another wrangle with this morning with an Uber who pulled in to pick me up and take me on this round trip that I'd booked, and took one look at the folded wheelchair. And I'd ordered a big Uber as well, so that it would fit in, even though they're designed to get into big boots. So I could have booked a smaller Uber, but I just thought don't want to annoy anybody at this time in the morning. He took one look at the wheelchair and pulled away. But then he very sillily, in order to go home, turned round and passed the house again, and next to my house is some traffic lights that he had to stop at. So I ran across the road and had a word. So it's been a long and tiring day, and I've also been waiting for the final few bits of voice for the latest edition of Too Much Information, which is nearly good to go, but I needed another couple of takes on a couple of the additional voices from my wonderful guest voice person who has to do it with sort of no direction from me, and so occasionally I ask her to do some retakes just to do a different speed or a different emphasis or whatever, and she always does, and she's always great. But she's busy too. She's a busy working actress, and fabulous she is too. So it's all been a bit of a juggle, and I think And so this one I've brought forward in the schedule. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Well, I just have to tell you stuff at the end so that anybody that's hung around till the end gets something. I think I used to just throw in a line or a quote or a joke, and now it's this sort of weird monologue that I can't think of is of interest to anybody. However, yes, patrons get something every other day, basically, during the week. But patrons today have been a little late because I've had this slightly cock-a-hoop, not cock-a-hoop, cock-a-hoop is happy, isn't it? Topsy-turvy day. And so I've then been playing catch-up and catching up on sleep as much as anything, but also having to look after shares and that sort of thing. Not that I'm complaining, and also not that I want to submit to rancour. I mean, I did complain about this taxi driver, and I do feel bad about that because, in this day and age when people go to the trouble of giving things 1 star that people have worked very hard on, you think, why not just not do anything? It seems a little bit vindictive, doesn't it? And we do have this, and I see for people sort of calling for people to be fired all the time. That person did a thing I didn't like. They should be fired. Should they really be fired? And I don't want to be responsible for somebody being fired. You don't know what sort of day somebody's having. You don't know what sort of life somebody's having, and an inconvenience to me or a difference of opinion from mine, I don't think means that somebody shouldn't be able to earn a living, and that seems a cruel thing to take away from somebody. Now, obviously that becomes a bit more complicated when you're talking about, people saying things in the media and doing things or behaving, violently or whatever. And what this guy did was against the law, but I still don't feel comfortable wielding the sword. But I have complained because, as somebody, a Doctor Who person, actually, a Doctor Who fan, very rightly pointed out, it's not about getting revenge. It's about trying to head it off happening to somebody else because it was inconvenient and upsetting. And there we go. This has got nothing to do with Doctor Who, but perhaps if I say it made me in a slightly spiky mood, I've relayed it to Meglos. But there we go. That's a little bit of insight into why this was late. Although if you're listening to it on, if you're not a patron and you're listening to it, it's no later than it should have been because this will be 6 months later. And I will probably have forgotten all about this, but I think it's just an insight into the everyday world of which I hadn't realised as a non-disabled. My partner is a wheelchair user. For those who don't know this stuff, it is an insight into the sort of everyday, casual little cruelties that are meted out to disabled people that I had no idea about until I started being involved with one, and I'm gobsmacked by the extent that these sorts of things go on. Anyway, this is why Doctor Who is better than real life. There we are. That's it. Even Meglos is better than real life. And I don't know. I suppose there's something cathartic about saying it out loud, which is why I'm grateful that you are out there listening to this. The 3 of you that have remained now to the bitter end. Ta-ta.